Hi, Steph from the BMW DIY Guy. Normally I got my little custom Euro license plate, but today I got my shirt on. So if you haven't noticed, I've got new swag. I'm really proud of it. I had to wear my own shirt. It's kind of like wearing your own band shirt, right? But I'm really excited to talk about my project today. I have the incredible high pressure fuel pump upgrade for my BMW F3X, and this is the upgrade from TuningTechFS. These guys put out an amazing product, and it really is going to make a tremendous difference in my car. So as you tune your car and you increase your turbo and you increase all the performance across the board, you can run into a point where your high pressure fuel pump can't support what you're asking it to do. I absolutely was starting to see that in my logs. So my last dyno run, as my RPMs went up, as my turbo boost went up, you could see my fuel rail come up and then really drop really hard, to the point that you could feel it. You could just feel it out of the car. The upper RPMs, there's a little bit of hesitation, a little bit where it's like struggling, but it's hard to say how, but you can just feel it. As you know your car, you know what you feel. So talking with Gabe and Frank of Tuning Tech, these are two incredibly passionate, amazing guys who are dedicated in improving the performance of your car, and a high pressure fuel pump makes a huge difference. So if you're going down the road of an aggressive tune like I am, or you've even taken that one step further of a big turbo upgrade, I'll be honest with you, I think this should be a required upgrade in your car. So one thing I want to talk about really quick is you can't just slap this in, you also need to update the tune on your car, whether that's BM3, whether that's MHD, whether it's for me, my bench tune from Active Auto Work. And actually Tuning Tech and Active Auto work together very closely, very often, so they're very familiar with their work. So I got an updated tune for my car that I'm gonna flash on my car after I get the pump installed. I cannot wait to do this. This has been really kind of a missing piece for me, and this work really isn't that hard. This is definitely more complicated than doing something like a charge pipe or even your intercooler or some interior changes, that sort of thing. But it's absolutely worth it. We're going to take you through step by step at a time. The other thing I really want to stress before we get to it, everything you need is listed in the description below. Everything you need there, from gaskets to tools to the part itself, is all listed below for the things that you're going to need. In addition, please click subscribe. Please click on that, subscribe to the channel, click the little alarm bell, because I still have even more projects coming and I can't wait to get to them, and this way you'll get notifications of when they come in. All right, after all that, let's get out to the garage, let's get started, let's walk you through this process. I'm really excited to get this in my car, and I'm really excited to help you get this in your car as well. All right, so here we are at the start of the project. So we're out in the garage. This is going to be a little bit more involved project, so I'm really going to take time to walk through step by step on this. The first thing that I've done is I've actually pulled the negative post off my battery. So you want to make sure to do the same, because anytime you open your door or do anything similar, you actually charge your fuel pump, and that's the last thing you want to do. So I've also brought the car in so it's still warm, because I had to start the car up to bring it here into the garage. So I want to give it enough time to cool down. So, give it an hour or two, plenty of time to cool down so you're not going to burn yourself, and also with your battery undone so you don't have to worry about fuel pressure quite as much. So I'm going to pull the engine cover. We're going to walk through all the steps to take the intake out. Though the goal in this, as I walk through this, my goal is ideally to lean the intake back. This is going to be a learning process as I go. If I can lean the intake back and not take it out completely, that's going to be the goal, because really, the least amount of things you want to mess with, the least amount of things you want to unplug, the better. The simpler, the better. So if we can get away with leaning the intake back instead of taking it out entirely, that's what we're going to do. So as we go through this process, that's going to be the goal. If we do end up having to take it out entirely, I'll show that as well. All right, so I'm going to pull my engine cover off. Let's get started. Okay, so I adjusted the camera a little bit. First thing you want to do is we're going to take out the engine foam. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can go all the way back and pull all these covers and pull this back strut off, which takes your foam is going to come out even easier because it just lays down on top. I'm going to pull my foam first because I've done it a bunch of times, no big deal. And you can also see your two gray cables right here. These are your O2 sensors. We're going to unplug those first. But first of all, as we look at this, what we want to do is we want to start pulling all these covers off. So you've got 10 millimeter just here, and you can take your socket. If they're loose enough like mine generally are, you can just turn them with your fingers and just turn this, and then this cover will come off, okay? Then you can start to pull the rest of these pieces to get to the top here, because we're gonna need enough room, like I said, we're gonna need enough room to lean the intake back. So the goal is going to be pull these pieces your charge pipe is right here. Now I've got the active auto work charge pipe. I hope if you haven't upgraded yours already, you should. If you're running the OEM, take this opportunity to replace it. Check out my other video for that. So we're going to unhook the charge pipe to give a little bit of flexibility here at the top. We're going to pull the foam. We're going to pull the O2 sensors. I'm also going to pull my cover on the other side as we walk through all of this. So I'll show you each step as we go along, but getting the top of the motor prepped is really, really simple. So let me pull the rest of that and I'll show you what's next. All right, so what we're going to do is we need to take a couple of struts off the back. There's a strut here that we're going to take off, and it's a little hard to see, but it's right here. It's an E18 that we're going to take off. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the other side, and that's basically it's a reverse torque. So it's an E18. You can take your trim tool or a flat bladed screwdriver, get underneath these covers right here, pop these covers up, okay, and you can pull all these out. So those all come out. Then you'll take a 10 millimeter. Once that's done, take a trim tool, pull the pin here and on the other side. Take a 10 millimeter all along this whole series for this plastic frame right here, all the way across. So that's 4 E18s, 1, 2, 3, 4 on that side. The other one is over here, right there. So then this strut bar will come off. We're going to take that out, and then we're going to take the 10 millimeter to take the rest of this plastic piece out, and then we'll be all exposed at the top, and we'll have access completely to the top of the motor, and we can lean the intake back. Okay, so let's have some catch up on what we just did. So it looks pretty dramatic, but it's really, really simple. So again, we pulled off this strut brace that went across the top here. If you have an F30, it might be in 2 pieces. In mine, I can see those 2 pieces, but there's a cross brace that makes it into 1 piece, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4 of those E18s, and then it just slides out. And then this cover here, there's a whole series of 10 millimeter all the way around, and a plastic trim tool, little plastic pin on that side. And I pulled that out, and then you just lift and pull it out. Now you've got this wire that runs through that track. I just picked it up and away. Again, I've unplugged my O2 sensors. The reminder of how to do that is you can just simply pick them up out of the clips. You can turn them over, and there should be a little depression clip that you press on the little clip, and the plug will come off. Okay, so that's nice and easy. So that's off and done. And I'm going to leave my O2 sensor sitting up in the clip up here right now, because there's no point in, they're not going to go anywhere. So that'll be fine. Now, as we look at all of this, there's more that we need to unplug. So I've taken my O2 lines and just peeled them back. I've got these big runs right here that are down into these clips that I've just pulled them up to get them up and out of the way. Okay, nice and easy. You also have this line right here. Let me adjust my camera a little bit so we can see it. It's a little hard to see, but it's right here. This is also going to need to unplug as well. And it's got a little pressure clip on, it has a little locking clip on the bottom. So I'm going to use a pick tool to pull away to unplug that as we peel all this back, because we want to have enough room to be able to pull this back. The other thing that I've done is that I have, like I said, the active auto work intake. I've got a horseshoe clip right at the top. As I mentioned a second ago, if you still have the OEM charge pipe, it needs to be changed. It really does. So maybe use this opportunity to do that project at the same time. So I've pulled the locking clip off the top of my intake and walked my intake down. So it is down and free of the bottom of the intake manifold itself. So I'm going to pull this wire off, and we're going to walk through the rest of this so we can get to all of the bolts here at the top of the intake and pull that, because the whole goal is to pull the entire intake back. If we can get away with it, we're going to undo this, because your DME is right here. It's bolted to the bottom of your intake, and all kinds of cables plugged in. So the goal is for leaning the intake back rather than taking the whole thing out, is unplugging less things. So if we can, we're going to lean the intake back. If we have to unplug a couple of cables on the DME so we can get some slack, we will. But trying to avoid all that extra time to pull the whole thing out. If we have to, we will. Okay, so I'm going to unplug this, and I'll show you what's next after that. We're really close to loosening up the intake and starting to lean it back. Okay, so I pulled this plug right here, which may or may not be necessary. And then, I'm always going to tell you if I do something a little off. There's a little horseshoe clip that's clipped to the bottom. When I pried it off, I dropped it. It's sitting down on my belly pan. Just be careful when you pry that off. Maybe if you use a pick, use one that maybe has a hook, so to help prevent you from dropping it. So my intake is loose, and I wanted to freehand this so you can see it. We've got 11 millimeter bolts here and here, 11 millimeter nut there, 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 and in the back, which is why we had to take all of this off. It's a little bit hard to see the one in the back, but it's there. Now, as you can see, the intake is loose now because the whole goal is to slip it up and away. I'm probably gonna have to slip my charge pipe down a little bit to gain a little bit of extra room, because I wanna scroll in, if I can. What we wanna get to is literally right there. That is your high pressure fuel pump right there. So all you need to do is get enough room to slide all this back to get to the pump and to get to the feed lines to swap it out, okay? So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna try to slide the intake back to get enough room to get all of that. So I'm gonna set back up on the camera and I'll show you how that works. All right, as you can see from the video, the intake's already back a little bit, right? So, but let's take a look at what we did to get here, because it was a little bit easier to do it and then show you what I did, okay? So first of all, the sensor that's plugged in right here, you've got a sensor here right next to your oil filter housing. That needs to be unplugged because it's in the way of the intake. So he just has a little pressure clip on it. You depress that pressure clip, pull it back. My MAF sensor, I also unplugged as well to get it out of the way so I can just pull these wiring harnesses up and out of the way. Now I've got gotta tell you, my oil cooler cap here is still pretty warm. If your car may be as well. So this whole thing has to sit on straight. You can see it kicked it at an angle right now, but that's only because after we slid it back. So basically grabbed it and very gently worked it back. You're really kind of at the maximum extension on these cables. There's a cloth tie that holds it here. But again, the goal is to do this without really doing as little extra work as possible. So I took the intake, pressed it down and out of the way, so it gives the connection for your charge pipe to the intake. So you've got extra room there, and just very carefully wiggled it backwards until it got free of the posts, and then you can see it'll sit up at an angle now. So now it's up at an angle, and the fuel pump is right here. It's a little difficult to see in the camera right now because of the camera angle, but my hands are directly on it. We can get tools on it. It's not a big deal. The other thing, just as a matter of interesting while you're at this, you can now see directly into your intakes. So you can actually see the condition of your intakes while you're here. See how dirty they are. Direct injection, they can get dirty. I've done my video on my oil catch can to try to avoid some of that as well. Mine aren't bad, even though I've got about 60,000 miles on my car. So the other thing you want to do is you want to put tape or lint-free cloth, anything across the top of those intakes so nothing falls in. You've got to avoid that like the plague. So make sure nothing falls into the top of your intakes. I've seen people use tape, like painter's tape, put it across there, but make sure you don't have anything that falls into your intakes because you're going to do engine damage that way. Okay, so now this is set back. I'm going to adjust my camera a little bit so we can see the fuel pump. We can see what we're looking at. All right, so we've got a nice clear view of the OEM fuel pump. So as you can see on the right-hand side, that the low pressure feed is already disconnected. It's already disconnected up here at the fuel rail as well. That is a 17 millimeter wrench, and I was able to get it on and just carefully loosen that back. I got a little bit of fuel drip, but it really was not bad at all, and it'll just evaporate off. It wasn't a big deal. So you've got a 17 millimeter on each side and a T30, two T30 Torx bolts holding down the fuel pump. So what I did was I loosened the feeds on both sides and then loosened the feed up here at the top because that's the easiest way to do it while the pump is bolted down. So at this point, we've really made a lot of progress, and as you can see, this isn't all that hard in the big scheme of things. So all we need to do now is just simply back out the two T30 Torx bolts, and the fuel pump will be out. The other thing is you can see on the back right there, you can see the plug for the fuel pump. It's got the same style little depression clip. You press on the little depression clip, and the plug comes up and off. Now, the other thing we're going to need to do with this plug is we're also going to cut that plug off to install the new one for the XDI pump, right? But really simple progress, really easy to do so far, and fuel leakage was really minimal. I gave it plenty of time with the battery unplugged, so the low pressure fuel pump was not pressurized, and it gave the car a little while to sit. Some of the guides are describe this as, you know, just explosive level gas pressure. That's not the case. Of course, be careful, but it's really not that bad. Now, you can also see the low pressure feed on this side that we're going to have to trace down, and that low pressure feed is going to be replaced. Now, the other thing I haven't shown yet that we're going to talk about in replacing the low pressure feed is we need to fit the fittings into the new hose. You want to use the new hose. It's E85 compatible, which is great for everybody that wants to run E85 with this improved pump. And we're gonna have to talk about how to get those fittings into place. But really simple, really straightforward. Next thing we're gonna do is pull the fuel pump. Okay, so as you can see, I want to show a couple of things here really quick. Now we've got looks like a kind of a vacuum connector right here. It's got those little pressure loops on each side that you press in and pull up. I pulled that and I've got it pulled up out of the way so to give me a little bit more room as I work through this space. Now the other thing I want to talk about here really quickly, I've gotten really lucky with my pump here today. Now, the bottom of the pump you'll see here in a second has a big spring assembly on it that can be under pressure. It can be compressed depending on the position of the cam lobe underneath. The BMW guide talks about how you can turn your motor and it should be essentially put that in the down position so the spring is not under tension. I've gotten really lucky here as I pull this out. Mine is not under tension at all. So I've gotten lucky and it's in that down position, which is great. Now, I want to talk to you, if you're not in that down position, I want to talk about that and be crystal clear just in case. And you know, as I press this in, it's probably in the down position. So if you are not as lucky as I am, you can either turn your camshaft to turn that down, or the easier way is when you put the new pump in and you're putting the bolts in, you're gonna put it into place and you're gonna do the bolts a quarter, like 90-degree turn at a time. 90-degree turn, 90-degree turn, 90-degree turn. So you're not cranking on that spring. As you can see the spring right here, what you don't want it to do is be going in at an angle. It has to be compressing down straight and even. So I hope that makes sense. But as you can see, the OEM pump is out, which is great. We can start to look and we'll get the new one in. Now, the other thing we're gonna have to look at, you can see the end of the low pressure fuel line there. We're gonna need to get underneath the car, unhook that line to get the new one in. All right, so the pump is out. I've got the new feed line very loosely attached here at the top. And as you can see, it fits through the metal. So kind of fit it into the grooves, into the block, into place. And it's very loose here at the top to give me enough swing so I can move it and swing it around when the pump is in place. But while the pump is out, we want to change out this plug. So as you can see on the plastic collar right here, or on the plastic run, there's a little collar that you can unclip at the top, and then you can pull the wire out of that plastic sleeve. Okay, you never want to cut right up here against the plug. And here's the new plug, as you can see. So polarity doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which side you attach to which, because the new pump requires a new plug. So we're going to cut this off. We're going to solder the new one into place, and we'll talk about that. And then there's heat shrink or heat wrap that goes around it right here as well once we've got those soldered connections into place. So we're going to cut this off, put on the new plug while we've got the maximum amount of room to work in this space. And then after that, we're going to look at, so here's the low pressure feed line right here. As you can see, we have to find the other end of that underneath the car. And we're going to, sorry, that was a little bit in the way. So we're going to find this at the other end of the car because we need to replace this as well with the new run. Now, the other thing we still need to do that I mentioned a second ago is pressure fit the fittings into that hose. And I'll show you that. What you're going to do is you're probably going to want to use a vise or a clamp, hold onto the hose and a heat gun to warm up the hose to get those fittings in. But I'll show you, it's not that hard. All right, so the one other thing I want to show really quick before we get serious about putting the new pump in is that we have to replace this bolt right here because it gets in the way of the new pump. That is an E10 that fits on right there. We'll back that out. TuningTech provides a new one that's kind of flush mount that fits in really, really well. So you can see right there, it's a 6. So we'll put that in to hold that sensor in so it won't be in the way. So I'm going to back that bolt out and then put the new one in. Then we can get serious about cutting the plug off and putting the new pump in. Okay, so as you can see, the plug is cut off and I've got one of the two lines soldered here. And let's talk about this really quick. So first of all, you can see it's a staggered cut. One line is a little bit longer than the other. It gives you a little bit better control over the wires. You're not trying to struggle with them both at the same place. They're also both not weak or weaker in the same place because that's where you cut them. So you've got a couple of options here. Like I said, we've got heat shrink on the line, so we've decided to solder them. You can also use heat shrink butt connector like this, but you have to have the right tool for it. You have to make sure that you do it correctly to get them in, crimp it down, and then heat shrink it down. You can do either way. So in this case, we're going to do, as suggested, we're going to solder the two and then run the heat shrink over the top. Now what you're going to do is when you bring your two wires up, and I'm going to do my best to do this with one hand, so forgive me in being a little awkward here. But you're just going to take the two up, make sure you've got a good twist on the wires so you don't have any extra strands out or anything else like that. And you kind of put them up in an X shape, like this. Twist them together and overlay each other so they're in a nice straight line. You'll see when you're done, they'll be twisted together in a nice straight line, right? So you're not just laying them side by side and then trying to glue them together. Now, I don't solder very much, so I'm going to talk through this. So if you decide to go through the solder route, you can take some advice like I have. So imagine that these are twisted together really nicely. You take a soldering iron, and what you're not doing is like the soldering iron on top and then like trying to drip solder onto it. That's just kind of ugly, and that's not the right way to do it. The solder is kind of dripping, and you end up with a bad connection. As you can see in this connection, it's really nice and clean. It's set up really, really well. You take your soldering iron and you put it underneath your join here. So imagine that these are joined. You're putting your soldering iron underneath when it's set up properly. Set it underneath, and your solder is coming from the top. So as you're kind of touching to the soldering iron, touching to the wires, it's transferring the solder. It's a wet solder down into the wire. So the solder is actually dripping down into the wire strands themselves. It's not just being globbed on or being dripped on, it's soaking in, as you can see right there. So let me zoom in a little bit. I'll try to do this really carefully so you can see a really nice, good, clean connection right there. And you end up with a nice, forgive the focus, sorry. You end up with a nice, clean connection like that, as you can see, and then we can do the heat shrink over the top. So then you'll know you'll have a good connection and your new plug will be on. It's easier than it sounds. I just wanted to make sure to show it in great detail. So the pump currently is just sitting in place because what I wanted to show was orientation. So let me move a little bit. As you can see, the collar, the pump is in two pieces. There's the lower collar and then the pump. So as you can see from the collar, you can see where the logo is. The logo is facing outward because the collar has to be in the proper orientation for the pump orientation as I come back over, because this is going to be your high pressure feed out this side. This is going to be your low pressure feed out this side. So you have to have it in the proper orientation. And as you can also see from looking at the video what the proper orientation is, but you need to make sure that the lower collar is in the correct orientation as well. Now you can also see when you look at the plug, or excuse me, you look at the sensor right here, why we had to change that bolt out, because there's no way with that E-bolt right there that it was going to fit. Okay, so that's why we had to swap that out. So I swapped out the sensor, or excuse me, swapped out the bolt on the sensor. Now the pump is just sitting in place. We haven't replaced the low pressure feed yet, but let's talk about that as well here briefly. Now it's going to be a little difficult to show, but I'm going to do my best. So you've got this big wiring harness bundle that's sitting right here, and you can see your low pressure feed right here. Well, the low pressure feed is held down by two brackets, right here and right here. These are also held down, that also holds down this wiring harness. So I was able to get at it from the other side coming underneath this wiring harness. They're 13 millimeter bolts and just back them out. So now this wiring harness is loose, but so is the low pressure feed. So I can pull the low pressure feed up and out of the way. And then I'll have to get those 13 millimeter bolts back in to hold that wiring harness in place. Sounds more complicated and harder than it is, but you can see the orientation as this is coming together. You just want to make sure that this all goes into the proper places, right? And so as we look at this, it's really not that hard. The other thing I've also got in place here is I've got the new plug. Now, the other thing that we've decided to use is I've got a little bit of extra wire shielding. So I got that and put that over the new wires, and that will plug in to the pump here. So that's soldered. The heat shrink is on. You have a little bit of extra this wire shielding to help protect the wires a little bit, which is not a bad idea at all. Okay, so you can see the orientation of the pump. You've got the shorter bolts that go into the collar. You've got the taller bolts with the washers that go into the pump itself. The bolts for the collar are 5mm, and then the uppers are 3/16, I believe. I'll have to double check, and if it's incorrect, I'll mention that in a moment, but I believe they're 3/16 Allen to get those into place. So as you can see, we're pretty much in place here. Now the only real big step that needs to be done is taking out the low pressure feed, which runs back and down. It's a little difficult to see right now, but it runs back and down. It's really easy to see where that runs back through, runs back this direction and runs back and down. So we're gonna have to get its connection lower down to pull that out and put the new feed in. All right, but this is coming together, and we're almost done. All right, so this is something that's easier to explain after the fact than during. So I took the belly pan off, which is probably excessive. I probably didn't need to take the whole belly pan off. Which is a whole series of 8mm bolts, super easy. I've had the belly pan off a dozen times by now. And then I've taken the mid pan off, which has a series of 8mm bolts down the side, one 10mm like hat at the end, and then you turn it to get it off the hooks that it's on right over there. So you just turn the whole belly pan at about a 45-degree angle and it comes off those hooks. Okay, so what you're seeing right now is the fuel line that's hanging. So I followed the fuel line down from where the low pressure line down, and it comes down into this grouping right here. Now, obviously, I've already got it off. We disconnected up at the top, so you have to keep in mind that the low pressure fuel line that's coming down still has fuel in it, right? And you've got your connector right here. So you're going to press on this sleeve and pull back to get this sleeve to disconnect from the hose right here, this piping. It's not a hose, it's pipe. Okay, now a couple of things that I want to talk about and really big cautions here right away. This is plastic. If you break this, this is going to be, so of all the things we've done today, the most delicate thing is this right here. So you need to be very careful pulling this out. If you bend on it, crank on it, you break the end off of this, and you're going to be replacing this line all the way back to your trunk, which is going to take a relatively simple job that you can do yourself and make it a lot harder. So I followed the low pressure line down to here where this connection is. So you press and pull back to slowly, very carefully work this connection out. You can see the connection right here. A couple of things. You could use a penetrant, maybe WD-40 if you wanted to squirt into this collar a little bit to help try to get this pipe out because it's a dry fit. There's no gasket. Help get this out. And then also keep in mind, don't have your face directly underneath this because the low pressure hose right here is going to have fuel in it. Just whatever the length of this hose is, it's going to have fuel in it. So you're going to get fuel that's going to come out when you replace this hose. But this is the place where you're going to connect in your new feeder hose. So it's in a clip right here, which hopefully you can see. There's a clip right here, so I just pulled the hose up and out of the clip. With one hand, I press this back and pull this collar back and then slowly work this hose out. As soon as it came out, it had fuel that came out, dumped on the ground, no big deal. It evaporates, so that's fine. So now what we're gonna do is we need to go take the new low pressure feed, fit in the ends to fit in the hose fittings and work this out and get the new one in. So I also want to go back up to the pump and show you what's going on with the pump. I've got the high pressure line connected, and I'll walk you through that, but I wanted to show you this next step so we can get the low pressure hose out. Okay, so this is back up at the top. The high pressure feed is on. You can get the wiring harness out of the way. It's on and snug. So where I was talking earlier, so here's the pump. I actually think that it was not in that rest, fully down in that rest position, because the pump was sitting up just a little bit, which you could tell because this high pressure steel fitting wasn't lining up, seemed to be slightly out of alignment. It's not the fitting, it's the pump. My pump was sitting a little bit high by probably just a quarter of an inch or so. So I did the 90-degree turn and tightening this down. So the collar is down like I talked about earlier. I set the pump into place in the correct orientation, and then when I put these bolts in, screw them in finger tight, and then would take my socket wrench and go right 90 degrees. 90 degrees on the other one, 90 degrees on this one, 90 degrees on the other one. It sounds kind of slow, and it is, but what you want to do is make sure that it's compressing the spring down equally. If it goes down at a weird angle, you're going to have problems, okay? So once I had that secured down and I got it all the way down where the bolts are snug, and then just went about a quarter turn further to make sure they're down and torqued. At that point, the steel fitting up here back at the top with my wiring harness in the way fit perfectly. This is a 17 millimeter. I got it all fit into place. Now, the other thing that you do when you put this into place, because of the way these fittings work, you want to make sure that these fittings don't get in at a strange angle. So put the nut on, finger tight. Then once I got that in and I had my wrench on this, I would just wiggle the hose back and forth, or wiggle the pipe back and forth a little bit as we put it into place to make sure that it was staying in nice and straight. It wasn't getting caught off at a strange angle and making a bad fitting. The last thing you want to do is have this leak. So just made sure that it was in nice and straight, wiggled a little bit so it wouldn't bind or catch until this was down snug. Again, got this down tight, went about another quarter turn to get it tight on both sides. So now the high pressure feed is in and snug at the pump and at the fuel rail, so that's good to go. Like I said, we just disconnected the low pressure line, so we're going to take and feed in the low pressure line in the same place. But what we really got to do next is get those fittings in the low pressure hose. So let's go there. All right, so the hose is fit. I just wanted to show this. I also want to take the opportunity. So this is that connection that's going to be for the fuel line that's coming out of your pump. There's no reason not to tighten this down right now and get this into place, because all it's going to do is snap in to that line underneath when we run this down through the engine compartment. Okay, so I put on some extra wire conduit because I had some handy to help protect this hose. You can see that this is the angled connection at the other end, and it's fit into the hose. Be careful when you do this. You do want to warm your hose up a little bit. Stuck one of the fittings in a vise very carefully and would warm up the hose and press it onto the fitting. It takes a little bit of work, but got it done just fine. This is the end that's going to go to the fuel pump. It's going to be angled down and away kind of like this, and I'll show it, of course, once it's on the pump, you'll see. And then we're gonna plumb this down underneath in the path of the other one once I move the intake back, and then we're gonna quick connect it at the other end, and we're just about done. Okay, so forgive a little bit of background noise. It's getting warm out here in the garage. You can see the fitting is in place right there. You just press the fuel line in and it'll click, and if it doesn't come back out, it's secure. And you can see where it clips back down into that clip right there. So it's secure from below, and you can put the mid-body panel back on, and you can put the belly pan back on, which, like I said, you probably could have gotten away without taking the belly pan off. So I need to secure it to the top of the fuel pump, and then we're just going to be putting the intake back on and wrapping up and cleaning up. Okay, so obviously progress has taken a jump forward. As you can see, the intake is mostly back in place, but it just swung back into place perfectly, and I didn't want to ruin that opportunity. So we did the quick connect on the fuel line, all the way back down to the fuel inlet from the tank. That snapped into place and dropped it into the clip as I was discussing. The belly pan and the mid pan go back on with all those 8mm bolts that we talked about, and the one 10mm hat. And then up here at the top, of course, I've connected, and you can see if you look very, very closely, you can see the fitting, and I'll zoom in really slowly. There's the fitting right there. If my camera will focus, for the low pressure feed right there. Now, here's the one thing that made an executive decision with all of this to reroute the low feed. So the low feed before with the steel piping, did that big bend, came down under that wiring harness and then dropped down in the back. Well, the new hose doesn't fit as smoothly there and really wants to get pinched. So made a decision to go ahead and run it here on the outside and away. And as you can see, it's not tightened down yet, but it's right here, and it routes better. It has no kinks in the hose. It's not getting pressed on by anything, and as you can see, there's plenty of space for it. So I actually made a decision to go ahead and run it on the outside of that rather than on the inside. The intake is swung up into place. The one thing I want to make sure to emphasize that I don't think I mentioned earlier, that you need to get new intake gaskets. So those gaskets are one use. once their seal is broken, when you pull your intake back, there are little gaskets that go in the entrances of all of your intakes. And so I bought a pack of those. The link will be in the description. And I've replaced all of those before fitting it back into place here. So you can see the intake's in place. All I need to do is just secure the low pressure feed line and then start bolting the intake back into place. Keep in mind you've got our 2 bolts at the top, the rest are nuts, and then we'll feed the Rusley's wires in, our O2 sensor wires, and anything else we've unplugged, including our plug here, our airflow sensor here, and all the rest. But all in all, we're back together. The belly pan's on, and it's almost done. Okay, so let's talk about final cleanup here before we do anything else. So there's still a few more things we need to do, but let's talk about it. Make sure that you've plugged everything back in. Obviously, I haven't put the support strut back on or the engine foam or the 2 covers, but those are just cosmetic and easy to do. So let's talk about the motor here. So O2 sensors are plugged back in. I unplugged my fuel rail back in there, back here, to make sure that I had a little bit of extra cable length. I unplugged the sensor here to get this wiring harness up out of the way. I unplugged here, it's all back in. Also unplugged my MAF down here, which is now all plugged back in. The intake is back up into place firmly with the clip back on. And then obviously the fuel pump here and all of the 2 bolts and all the nuts for the intake are back on now. So a couple of things about that really quick. Make sure the mating surfaces for your intakes are clean and you've used new gaskets. I think I might have mentioned that before, but just in case, you want to make sure that you're using new gaskets. Don't reuse the old. They're cheap. They should be listed in the description for this. So that's all back together. Now, the other thing you're going to want to do is, once this is all back together, you can plug your ground back on your battery. If you open your door, that's gonna pressurize your low fuel pump. You'll hear it. That whine is your low fuel pump. You can use that opportunity to check for leaks. If you haven't put your belly pan on yet, you can you can look underneath, make sure it's not leaking there. It's not. You can check all of your fuel pump up here, make sure that it's not leaking, and you're good to go. Once that's all done, this is actually a stage where you could potentially start the car and check. Now, one of the most important stages that we still have to do is I need to update my tune. I'm running the bench tune from Active Auto Work, so I'm gonna reflash my tune with the changes for this fuel pump. Now, if you're running like MHD, you're gonna wanna flash with that checkbox because they actually have an option for that. I believe JB4 does as well. I believe BM3 does. But you're gonna need to update your car to reflect this new fuel pump. But at this point, mechanically, it's all back together. All I need to do is put that cross brace back on, put the black plastic back in first. If you remember all of the 10 millimeter, you put that cross brace back on with, if I remember correctly, the E18s, and your cover's back on, and pretty much you're good to go. And then flash your car. I'm not going to show specifically about flashing your car because everybody's going to be different. I'm going to use my laptop and an updated tune that I have from Active Auto Work, which I really like. I talked to them, they sent me an updated tune to reflect the new fuel pump. So at that point, once you flash your car, it's all back together and you flash your car, you can test it, fire your car up, still in the garage or where you're working, and check for fuel leaks. Make sure, look at all of your connections, look at your fuel rail, make sure you're not leaking or you have any issues there, okay? Make sure your car doesn't throw any air codes. Other than that, you're done. So you're back to put it together, check for leaks, take it out for a drive, make sure it drives well. Other than that, we're done. All right, the project's all done. I'm wrapped up. All my tools are put away, back here inside, car's out in the garage. So, as you can tell, this is a very detailed project, but this is something that you can absolutely do with really a surprising set of simple tools that doesn't really require anything complicated. It doesn't require a shop or anything crazy. This is something that you can do on your own. Now, a couple of things I really want to stress. So I ran into one problem because I talked about going and flashing my car, and I ran into one problem that for a little while hung me up pretty good in flashing my car. If you've seen my ARON, AWRON gauges that I have in the center of my dash, if you've done the same or you have similar gauges, that can interfere with the communications to the car. So when I plugged my laptop in to run my updated tune that I got from Active Auto Work, I had all kinds of communication problems. The app didn't want to talk, it would talk partially, It would try to read my car and come back saying it couldn't. And I'll be honest with you, I had a few minutes where I was like, what's wrong? What have I done wrong? I've done this so many times. And then I remembered that the Aaron gauges need to be set into passive mode. So if you have those same gauges, which I know are not common, but if you have those same gauges, make sure to put them into passive mode before you try to flash your car, regardless of what you're using. I also find that the Aaron gauges will interfere if I'm trying to use logging. If I plug my phone into my car to pull logging, I need to turn my Aaron gauges off, which is what I remembered. So I turned them off and I could flash my car without a problem. So I really wanted to call that out to make sure that it's here, and so if you guys have the same setup. So as you can see, it's really not that hard though. You can walk through the process, just take it slowly. I know that was the first time I've done it, and it took longer than I expected, but it really wasn't bad. I saved myself a lot of shop time on how to do it, and I'm sure you can too. If I do it again, I'm sure I'd probably do it in half the amount of time I did this time because I'm really familiar with the process. I know it to just zip right through. Okay, so all the descriptions for everything you need is listed down below from all the parts and tools. And I thank you for watching my video. I look forward to seeing you on my next one. Thank you to Tuning Tech again for just being an amazing partner in this and making such a dramatic difference in my car. The one thing I wanted to stress, now my sample size is a little small, but I had a 100-mile drive yesterday with the new pump in. The car felt smoother, stronger, and I might have got it up in the upper RPMs a couple of times, and it felt smoother and stronger through the whole pull. Now this might be coincidence, but door to door over 100 miles, I had 36 miles to the gallon, which is really better because I run on average, and I reset all of my counters. I run on average in the kind of low 20s-ish, like 23, 24, 25, right around in there. And it felt different. So I reset all my miles per gallon counters on that drive. And from door to door, I got 36. I have never in my life seen that high. So it might be coincidence, and maybe just the driving yesterday, the right conditions for it, but it was downright amazing. Okay? So I cannot stress how important this is for your car. If you're in that upper percentage of people that are tuning your car up towards the limits, this is gonna make a difference for you. Please do it. All right, please click subscribe and check it out. I've got more videos coming, more projects coming. I try to answer as many questions as I can, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.